White Pass and Yukon Route, the scenic railway of the world. Passengers arriving at Fraser, British Columbia, coming from Skagway, Alaska, have traveled 27 miles up and over the dramatic and historic White Pass. Those remaining on the train and travelers boarding at Fraser embark on the equally celebrated 40-mile excursion to Carcross, Yukon, featuring a stop at famous Lake Bennett. Leaving Fraser, the rails follow the Trail of 98 along the lakeshore. Although less rugged than the terrain between Skagway and Fraser, the landscape is just as spectacular in other ways. The valleys are now wider and filled with shimmering, pristine water confined by the now distant mountains. Steering away from the watercourse, the train crosses the Klondike Highway and rumbles through a once important stop on the original Trail of 98. There isn't much left to be seen of the place called Log Cabin. However, during the rush, it was the location of the Canadian Customs Office, the Northwest Mounted Police Headquarters, and in 1898, a railroad construction camp. Here, the trail is somewhat level and therefore less arduous. The stampeders quickly took advantage of the numerous and more suitable methods for moving their supplies. By now, the rocky and sparse landscape has given way to a northern boreal forest typical of the interior. Pine and fir dominate the ridges, and growth more common to the subarctic is prominent to the valley floor. The slow descent into Bennett in the comfort of a coach is stark in contrast to the thousands of gold seekers arriving at the tent town during the winter of 1897. Bennett, at the junction of the Chilkoot Trail and the White Pass, became the largest tent city in the world. More than 10,000 people camped here in the winter of 97 and 98, building boats in temperatures dropping to -40 below zero. Work went on day and night, the stampeders desperate to be ready for the spring breakup and the final 550-mile trip down the Yukon to the Klondike. On May 29, the ice began to move. A flotilla of more than 7,000 boats left Bennett for the goldfields. Within 48 hours, the tent city was reduced to little more than a ghost town, and silence fell upon the valley. A White Pass train whistle broke that silence on July 6, 1899. Amid great fanfare, the final spike was driven. The fierce White Pass was conquered. The monumental task of linking Tidewater to the Yukon by rail was complete in just 13 months. After the gold rush, a small community remained in Bennett, its existence relying on the operations of the railroad. Cooks at Bennett Station provided northern-style meals for visitors and train crew alike. In winter, guests were often stranded at Bennett for days until the line to Skagway could be cleared. Card games, checker tournaments, and music pounded out on the piano kept everyone entertained. Lake Bennett is the most beautiful of the Yukon lakes. The scheduled stop in Parks Canada's Chilkoot Trail National Historic Site allows passengers time to become acquainted with the town site and its colorful gold rush history. An icon of the historic site and lure to passengers is St. Andrew's Church, Bennett's only standing gold rush monument. When it's time to leave, the unfamiliar faces with the backpacks at the depot are the hikers coming off their trek of the Chilkoot Trail. The White Pass and Yukon route is their way back to civilization.
All aboard! All aboard, everyone!
Construction of the railroad continued towards Carcross along the steep and rocky shoreline of Lake Bennett. Sections of the rail bed cost $250,000 per mile, the equivalent of $5.5 million today. Only a narrow-gauge train is capable of maneuvering the twists and turns of the track. The train slows at milepost 43 for Guardrail Curve, the sharpest bend on the entire route. Pennington Station, the last remaining White Pass section house, was built to lodge railroad maintenance crews. During early spring, workers were sent out onto the lake to cut blocks of ice. The frigid slabs were loaded on a train bound for Skagway, where they were insulated with sawdust and used for refrigeration during the summer. The meanderings of the train expose a multitude of vistas, often compared to those of Switzerland by past and present White Pass travelers. These visions of grandeur were surely not lost, even on the anxious stampeders navigating the lake in the spring of '98. As the construction crew worked north from Bennett, another workforce had been building the railroad towards Carcross from Whitehorse. On July 29, 1900, the White Pass and Yukon Route Railroad was officially completed with the driving of the Golden Spike. Whoopee! The port of Skagway was now connected to the transportation hub of Whitehorse and beyond. After the rush to the Klondike, WP and YR went on to become a fully integrated transport company, fulfilling the needs of the Yukon's population and industry. The charming village of Carcross is the last stop. Now over 100 years old, the White Pass and Yukon Route Depot is still the meeting place for Yukon explorers and rail passengers, just as it was during the gold rush. It took 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days to complete the 110 miles of international railroad. Owing to the difficult and extreme conditions of its construction, it was a feat of epic proportions. This triumph over challenge made it possible for travelers to reach the Klondike on one continuous journey. There would be no more walking or packing of supplies on the backs of man or beast over the Trail of '98. Every turn in the track provides a new experience and deeper understanding of those of the past who have left their mark on this remarkable land, their legacies preserved by today's adventurers riding the rails of the White Pass and Yukon route, the scenic railway of the world.